Good evening, happy Monday, and welcome one and all. I am Sheila Boston, president of the New York City Bar Association, also known as your pandemic president, since for most of my tenure, I've been interacting with you virtually as I am this evening. It has indeed been a wild and crazy 2 years. And although it has been very challenging, especially because of the pandemic, I must say that the time has passed away so quickly and that this role as City Bar President has been an honor, privilege, and labor of love, for sure. I am just so very excited that it looks like there is a light at the end of the tunnel for us with respect to the pandemic. We must acknowledge and be aware that the nasty virus and its variants are still wreaking havoc in the world, but we as human beings have proved that we are resilient, courageous, and productive. So we've been prodding along in this, I guess you can call it a new normal, responsibly getting vaccinated, wearing masks, and taking other precautions. But we are courageously getting back out there, visiting with friends and family, and slowly but surely attending professional events at the City Bar, 42 West 44th Street, and elsewhere. And I don't know about you, but I feel like it is finally about time. And I am just so elated to start interacting with the law community in person again. Now, as I only have a short time to continue to use my City Bar President platform and bully pulpit to remind you of this, I must yet again give my public service announcement and remind all of you to please, pretty please, take very good care of yourselves. That's in mind and spirit as well as body. Never suffer in silence. Take mental health and wellness seriously. Be kind to yourselves as well as others. Admit that we've all been experiencing traumatic times, and let's strengthen our resolve to be better and do better in our lives and in our interactions with others. Remember, mental health and wellness has been one of the 6 pillars of the City Bar, AKA the Bar of Hope. Another one of the major pillars has been diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as most of you know, I am very passionate about that. 2 years ago, when I became president, I was excited to announce that in honor of me becoming the first woman of color serving as president in our 150-year-old City Bar, I was going to install a presidential series with a focus on Black women and girls, highlighting their, or really I should say our, since I am a Black woman, our successes and challenges as they relate to the field of law and legal issues. Working with various committees and the Office for Diversity and Inclusion, I was very proud that we presented 4 programs. They included being educated about the over-policing of Black girls in the education system. We met and learned from 4 brilliant Black women law school deans. We had an illuminating panel about Black women in the prison industrial complex and the challenges of their re-entry into the community. And our very own phenomenal executive director, Brett Parker, introduced 4 Black women who have been serving on our City Bar board. Now, to be honest with you, I really tried really, and very hard to put together one last program for the presidential series. But I have just had so much going on and my time ran out. However, I am excited, encouraged, and thrilled because we are fitting in one more diversity, equity, and inclusion program during my tenure, which will focus in on women of color. More specifically, the dynamic Asian women lawyers and judge who have been serving on the City Bar Board of Directors. It was Devika Kawal Ramani who came up with the idea, and I just thank her so much for taking the initiative and making this program possible this evening. Also, if I may just share a bit of good news, I'm excited to share with you that just last week at our board meeting, Devika was voted in to serve as the next chair of the City Bar Board. That is for the 2022-23 Bar Association year. So kudos to you, Devika, as I know I'm leaving our board in great hands. And if I can just give you a serious hand.
Thank you.
So excited. We have a very large and diverse membership at the Bar of Hope, about 24,000 members. And I am in awe of its high caliber membership. Moreover, I'd be remiss if I didn't take a quick moment to express how very proud I am of the outgoing 2021-22 City Bar Board of Directors. We had a fantastic group of individuals who all came together respectfully and with one mission, despite our different perspectives. And that mission in a principled way was to equip and mobilize a diverse legal profession to practice with excellence, promote reform of the law or needed changes, to uphold the rule of law and access to justice, and to do these things in support of a fair society and the public interest in our community, our nation, and throughout the world. We as a board have been led by my dear friend Harlan Levy, shout out to him, chair of the board. And I must note that this outgoing board was truly diverse. Listen to this, all of you. 50% of the board members represented communities of color. Over 50% of our board members are women. And we were top heavy with women leadership, may I add. I as a president, and we had 3 women vice presidents. So I must say that for me, the experience was personally and unequivocally amazing. I have previously and transparently, frankly, shared with you that we have a national history of Black women being overlooked, undervalued, and marginalized. Well, the same can be said for my Asian women sisters as well. And that's why I am so excited about you hearing from and witnessing the brilliance and excellence of the women who will be featured this evening. So without further ado, I wish to welcome you to our Bar of Hope program entitled A Discussion with Asian American Women Leaders on the New York City Bar Board. That is the Bar of Hope. Carmelyn Malalis, our distinguished moderator. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. And now I'm just going to let you take it away. So please, the floor is now all yours.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Sheila, and thank you for making the time to join us for tonight's program. I also just want to personally express my gratitude to you for doing, during your tenure, just bringing such what I think of as very exciting and timely programming to the City Bar, and really kind of exploring the breadth of diverse issues that we as both lawyers in our profession, but also just as, people living in these kind of interesting times are experiencing and living through. So thank you for all the efforts that you've put in to put together such, again, timely and exciting program for all of us. So good evening to everyone who's joining us today. My name is Carmelyn P. Malalis. I have the great honor of facilitating and moderating tonight's exciting conversation. You are in for a real treat. I was saying this a little bit earlier before folks joined us, before we opened up the programming, but you, in earnest, you are in for a real treat here. Because not only are we joined tonight for a discussion with some very incredible practitioners in our field, but you're also, we're drawing from a real diversity. Speaking of diversity, we're drawing from a real diversity of different practices here. So you're going to hear about people's, personal and professional experiences in a variety of different fields. With, I think, the common denominator of all of us having some investment in this City Bar Association. So, without further ado, I'm going to just briefly introduce myself and then introduce the wonderful panel that we have today and have a great program. For folks, just so that you know, the chat feature for all of you is disabled, but we are able to take in some Q&A questions. And so as we are having the discussion, I'll try to weave in some of the questions that we might get in through the Q&A through that. And you may find that some of the things that you're wondering, whether they're, kind of personal professional experiences that each of the panelists have had during the course of their career, and their different paths to joining the City Bar, you may find that we cover that anyway. But please feel free to send your questions in, and we will try to cover them. So I am not currently on the City Bar's executive board, but I have been on the City Bar's executive board, I think, 2 times prior. I most recently, in October of 2021, I stepped down from a role that I had been filling since February of 2015, when I was appointed the chair and commissioner of the New York City Commission on Human Rights. So I was appointed by Mayor Bill de Blasio in 2014, and I started my service there in February of 2015. And like I said, I just stepped down from that role in October of 2021. Prior to being at the Commission on Human Rights, I had been a law partner at the employment law firm of Outen and Golden, where I represented employees and workers in kind of all aspects of employment-related issues, whether it was individual actions, class actions, negotiations, advice-related issues, anti-discrimination-related cases, harassment-related cases, contract cases, wage and hour, kind of you name it. And prior to that, I had been at Sullivan and Cromwell as an associate in the litigation department there doing management side securities litigation. So I've also kind of jumped around a bit myself. We are joined tonight by four amazing Asian American women leaders. I think of them as women leaders not just in their fields in law here in New York City, but in their fields just generally. And again, just a great way for us to be spending one of the evenings of our API Heritage Month. We are joined tonight by Kathy Haradakin, who started at Cadwalader immediately after graduating from Columbia Law School in 1980. She became a partner in litigation in 1990 and then left for Kroll and Moring in 2018, where she is now a partner there in litigation and healthcare. She has served as a member of numerous task forces and advisory councils at the request of state and federal judges and state and city officials. She is also on a number of not-for-profit boards. She is currently the acting chair of the New York City Commission to Combat Police Corruption and co-chair of the board of the Medicare Rights Center, a national not-for-profit organization dedicated to helping older adults and people with disabilities obtain affordable health care. She is also a member of the Commercial Division Advisory Council, the Attorney Emeritus Advisory Council, and the Second Circuit Judicial Council Committee on Civic Education and Public Engagement. Kathy has been nominated 3 times for appointment to the New York Court of Appeals by the New York State Commission on Judicial Nomination, most recently in April of 2021. She has also received numerous awards, including this New York City Bar Association's Diversity Champion Award in 2015. She has served on several different committees at the City Bar, but we're going to talk about that later, so I'll wait for her to give you that information later on. We are also joined by Devika Kewalramani, who, again, I think we owe Devika our thanks in actually coordinating and bringing this program to bear. Devika is a partner and chair of Moses and Singer's Legal Ethics and Law Firm Practice, which represents law firms, lawyers, and legal departments on legal ethics, professional responsibility, law firm risk management, lawyer licensing, and admissions matters. Devika serves as a member of the Attorney Grievance Committee for the First Judicial Department of the New York State Supreme Court. She was appointed a member of the New York Commission on Statewide Attorney Discipline in 2015 and served as a co-chair of its Subcommittee on Transparency and Access. Devika is a frequent lecturer, panelist, and author on legal ethics. She speaks to law firms, corporate legal departments, bar associations, professional groups on a wide range of legal ethics matters. She has served as a faculty member of the Practicing Law Institute and Law Line. So I'm sure Devika is she's the most important person in the room because everyone always wants to talk legal ethics and understand those issues a little bit more. So we welcome Devika. We are also gratefully joined by Judge Kiyo Matsumoto. Judge Matsumoto was at the United States Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of New York for 21 years and as an assistant United States attorney. She was also a supervisor and also notably was the deputy chief and chief in the civil division while she was there. From 2004 to 2008, Judge Matsumoto was a United States Magistrate Judge in the Eastern District of New York. And in 2008, she started serving in her current role as a United States District Court Judge in the Eastern District of New York. So welcome and thank you for being with us today, Judge Matsumoto. We are also joined tonight by Sandra Park. Sandra is a senior attorney at the ACLU Women's Rights Project, where she's been there for 15 years. Sandra engages in litigation and advocacy at the federal, state, and local levels to advance gender equality, with a particular expertise in fair housing and the rights of survivors of gender-based violence. She is the 2021 recipient of the American Bar Association's Sharon Corbett Award for exceptional service and leadership to improving the legal response to domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and/or stalking by a lawyer. She was also the board chair of Girls for Gender Equity, an organization that centers the leadership of Black girls and gender-expansive youth of color to reshape culture and policy. So all of the individuals who I've just introduced to you tonight, all of them have obviously not just had exciting careers in the law, but have also chosen to dedicate some of their time and energies, which we know are limited, to working for the benefit of the city bar in different capacities. And except for me tonight, everyone I think is a current board member here at the New York City Bar Association. So first, I welcome all of you to tonight's program. I thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here. And I think we're gonna start diving in. One of the points of today's program, I think, is to identify for folks, why the city bar, why do you spend your valuable time working with this institution, but also I think people want to have a general sense of your stories that brought you here and that brought you to explore membership at the city bar. So I think we're going to start, enough about me, so to speak. I'm going to kind of pepper in some of my experiences, I think, with some of yours. But why don't we start first with Devika? Devika, what brought you to the city bar? Kind of give us the when, the how, and the why. There's a lot of different bar associations. I know it's something that we all think about. Where do we put our energies? So give us a little bit of history into what brought you here.
First, let me thank Sheila for her kind remarks, and Carmelyn, thank you so much for facilitating us today. It used to be from some years ago when I was a junior associate that law firms in New York City would encourage their associates to join the city bar. And I was one of those fortunate ones who had a colleague at the firm who introduced me to the city bar. And I came to a meeting. It was in a practice area that I was then a part of at the firm. And active bar participation was truly encouraged. And it was really viewed as a part of a junior lawyer's professional development as a lawyer. And it was seen as a way for junior lawyers and other lawyers to build strong relationships outside of the more traditional office environment where you met other lawyers who were at the firm, or meeting other lawyers through your work for clients who are opposing counsel and others. And one of the things that struck me most was the amazing breadth of member services that were available and resources. Even back then, and I'm speaking about some decades ago, which have of course become much more robust today. And I started attending some events, meeting with some lawyers, doing a little bit of networking. And before I knew it, I was a member. And I felt very welcome from the very beginning. And I have continued to do so. So it was just a lovely start of a great relationship.
Yeah, I find that the larger law firms oftentimes, I think, do probably a better job at educating newer lawyers on the benefits of, bar membership or bar associations. Sandra, you clearly did not start at a law firm, and so that was not, like Devika, your entry point into the city bar. Can you tell us a little bit about what brought you to the city bar?
Sure. It's a pleasure to be here with you all tonight. I totally agree with that. I think as someone who, after my clerkship, has worked in the nonprofit sector since, I think bar membership and participation is not something that is as known in the nonprofit legal world as part of professional development. At the time, I think I joined the city bar about 17 years ago. And so at the time I was at the Legal Aid Society, I was working in, I had a project to provide services, legal services to immigrant survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. And through that, one of the attorneys I met mentioned the City Bar as a place that I could potentially connect with attorneys, particularly because I was interested in ultimately doing civil rights work. And so I joined the City Bar, and I actually joined the Civil Rights Committee. And that was about 2 years before I actually got my current job at the ACLU as a civil rights attorney. And so it was a really good entry point for me in terms of just meeting other attorneys, getting a sense of, the kinds of issues that both, dedicated civil rights attorneys, as well as law firm and other attorneys, government attorneys, et cetera, were doing in the civil rights field. And it's initially why I joined the City Bar.
I think similar to you and Devika, I joined relatively early in my law career. I think probably either during my clerkship time or right after my clerkship time. I clerked right after law school. And I joined it, but I don't think I quite understood how to really take advantage of the experience. So I think I probably had a few years lag before I started actually doing something with the Bar Association. Like, I think I probably received one of those flyers that new graduates receive of, join these different bar associations. And at that point, for new graduates or sometimes for students, the admission rates are still, quite reasonable. So it's much easier to do it at that period of time. But I think I actually started becoming more active when I was probably just starting out at Oughton and Golden. So after my time at Sullivan and Cromwell, when I went into Oughton and Golden, and I wanted to focus more of my professional energies in the LGBTQIA space. And so knowing that there was a specific committee on LGBT, I think at the time it was called LGBT rights, it was really attractive to be able then to meet other folks who were also very interested in working in issues involving LGBT rights, to see how I could kind of, both from an issue development space, but also just a professional development space, see how I could develop my area more. I know when we were chatting, prior to the program, Judge Matsumoto and Kathy, it seems like the two of you had kind of different stories. You came to your City Bar allegiance a little bit later on in your professional careers. And I think your stories are actually very interesting for that reason as well. Judge Matsumoto, can you share a little bit with folks what brought you to the City Bar, and what was your hesitation?
Sure. When I originally moved to New York in 1983, I was coming here to start a job at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And like Sandra, the office didn't really, they didn't pay for bar dues, for one. And second of all, I don't think many of the AUSAs were focused on bar membership and bar work. But I got involved probably as early as 1985. And I had little gaps in my membership, I'll admit, because the bar dues at the time for me, for a public servant with kids and all of that, seemed a little stiff. And there were other bars that I got involved in that had, for example, the Federal Bar Council or the Asian American Bar Association had sort of more programs that I felt more at home getting involved in. But I got most involved, I would say, after breaks in my membership in 2002, when I was asked to join the Judiciary Committee, which was chaired at that time by Jay Johnson. And through that committee work, I found that there was really interesting aspects to that whole process, and I was very happy to be part of it. They work very hard, but I think they strive very hard to make thorough reports and to be very fair and balanced. And so that really got me much more involved in the City Bar. And I pretty much have maintained my membership since then and have gotten more involved in other committees.
Thanks, Judge. Kathy?
Yeah, I guess, I as well. Oh, thank you, first of all. I mean, it's a privilege to be part of this panel. But I should think that I'm probably even a later starter than Judge Matsumoto here. I did not join until 2014, which I didn't realize until Carmelyn sent me my history of city bar membership. And I mean, there were multiple reasons for that. Part of it was I was a member of several other bar associations, one of which was the New York County Lawyers Association, which was much more geographically desirable from my point of view because I lived in Brooklyn and I worked downtown. And besides, when I first joined, the partner who had the office next door to mine was the president of nightclub, and he encouraged me to join. I was also a member of the Asian American Bar Association of New York. And with, you know, a busy practice as a young associate and with small children, I did not want to join any additional bar associations. So I didn't come to the bar association, the city bar, until 2014. And it's funny that Judge Matsumoto mentioned the Judiciary Committee because that's what really attracted me to city bar as well, in a slightly different way. Carmelyn mentioned that I was up for a spot on the Court of Appeals several times. And after that first effort, the committee that I think impressed me the most of all the Bar Association committees that vetted me was the Judiciary Committee of the City Bar. I was just so impressed with the job they did, how prepared they are, how probing their questions were, and just how they comported themselves throughout the whole process, that I got interested in City Bar. And so a couple of years after that first experience, I finally joined. I did not become really active for a couple of years after that. But that was really why I joined the City Bar. I was just so impressed by the folks on the Judiciary Committee. And I realized, you know, I'd been missing out on a good thing all those years.
Thanks for that, Kathy. You know, I think that something that you said and something that Judge Matsumoto said is probably resonates quite a bit for some of the folks who may be watching, in that there's so many different bar associations and there's different reasons that, you know, people join different bars. Sometimes it's about literally physical proximity. Sometimes it's because of who in your office, especially if your organization's leaders, you know, you mentioned a partner in your office, are more active with one bar association or another. Sometimes it's because of identity issues where people find more camaraderie in one space than another, right? I think something that is kind of an interesting question for both you and Judge Matsumoto is, you know, looking back now, if you had more of a sense of what the City Bar was like earlier on in your career, do you think you would have joined earlier on in your career? And, you know, and what benefits, if any, do you think that would have provided you had you joined earlier?
I think the City Bar has changed over the years. I know when I first walked through the big marble hallway and looked at all the portraits and went into the meeting room and looked around, you know, the other committee members, I thought, wow, there's a whole other legal world here in New York that as a federal government lawyer, I'm not exposed to. And I think that it's the old, you know, you don't know what you don't know. And certainly the bar has transformed itself, or at least as I grew professionally, maybe I've believed that the bar has become more dedicated to inclusion, and also with all of the various committees, there is a place for everybody, regardless of what your background or interests are. I think there's a place to find companionship and professional relations. The Judiciary Committee, for me, as I said, was really an impetus to explore more, because many of the members of that committee had been on other bar committees, and my interest in the organization certainly grew. Would I have joined earlier? I think, honestly, where I was at that time with all the other pressures of the job and family and everything else, I would like to think that I would have joined earlier had I known then what I know now. But it's the old problem of having so many pulls on your time. And like Kathy, I was even further from the 44th Street because I would come from Brooklyn, and that would be a good 45 minutes to, get up to Midtown for meetings.
And one of the things I always encourage young associates to do now with the benefit of hindsight is to join a bar association and to get involved in the committee work of the bar association. I mean, a lot of the law firms will pay the dues for you to join, but unless you really are willing to sort of dig in and spend the time, you don't really get everything you can out of the experience. So I do encourage younger associates to join a bar association, but also to dig in and join a committee that interests them. But you have to be willing to set aside the time for that. And I will admit, as a young associate and as a young partner, even the way I managed my time is different than probably the way it should have been. I should have spent more time networking and spending time at bar associations. But, with young children and the heavy workload, I tended not to do that. And as I said, in retrospect, I probably should have spent more time at places like City Bar when I was a younger lawyer.
I think that, you brought up networking and, developing a practice at City Bar. And for a lot of the different bar associations or for newer attorneys, I think joining a bar association, it can be quite daunting, right? I know frequently when I'm speaking to either law students or I'm speaking to newer attorneys, they say kind of different renditions on, I know I'm supposed to be networking, but how do you network? It's like kind of this circular skill to have of, if I don't really know how to network, how do I just kind of jump in and start doing it? And who do I talk to, et cetera, et cetera. I personally think one of the beauties of being at the City Bar Association is its kind of committee and task force system, which I think makes, socializing, networking, breaking in a lot easier than at other bar associations. And, when I was recalling my own experience, so there was kind of a period of I didn't really know what to do with this. And then I thought to myself, oh, I know there's an LGBT rights committee here, so I'm going to join that. It was just a really quite a wonderful experience for me because I joined this committee. I got to know the other members, I think, 20 odd members who were on that committee. And many of the people, at least on that committee, it wasn't necessary. Some folks were on that committee because they worked in the field professionally of LGBT rights. But a lot of the folks were also on that specific committee because they had a personal interest in advancing LGBT rights, right? So we're looking at 2008, 2000, or actually I'm saying 2000, maybe 6 or 2007. So pre-marriage equality, and for I think a lot of folks, what you can do in that area, it was there was a viewpoint that it was limited. Like I remember even as an employment lawyer, some folks were like, how can you possibly focus on LGBT rights? The law is not supporting you. This is kind of a just hit your head against the wall sort of thing. And so it was really quite wonderful then to join a group where I was I was joined by individuals who were equally interested in this for both personal and professional reasons, and were looking to advance the law in this area. And then after a brief stint, as a member, I became a chair of that committee. And in being a chair, you're also not just networking and socializing with the folks on that committee, but you then have the ability to then reach out to the other committees who have issues that touch on your issues. So I had Sex and the Law Committee and the Civil Rights Committee and kind of other committees that I began talking with and networking with and speaking with. So again, I think that the fact that the city bar has this committee system, which is fairly unique in my mind, the way that it's developed, both from a kind of a socializing and a personal space, but it's also built into the professional sort of work, the substantive work that the Bar Association does. I think it would be really interesting for folks to hear about, for all of you, what were the committee choices that you made? How did you end up joining the committees you chose? Just having looked at all of your committee backgrounds and task force backgrounds, I know we have a wide variety of different committees that we have all been on. And so I think it'd be interesting for folks to hear about, like, why did you join whatever committees and how has that helped you professionally and how has that helped your professional growth? And so I'm going to start off maybe on that question with Sandra, because also just looking at your committee list, you've also been on a variety of different committees and task force at the City Bar.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think my experience, a lot of what you said resonated with me. Like I mentioned, I started in the Civil Rights Committee because I had an interest in moving to a civil rights organization. And so it was enormously helpful in terms of actually getting to meet attorneys who are working on various civil rights issues here in the city. But there were also really substantive, amazing projects that committee did that as a pretty junior attorney I was working on. One that I remember in particular, we did an amicus brief to the Second Circuit that I was really involved in drafting. And I think that was the first, federal appellate brief that I'd ever had any hand in doing a lot of primary drafting on, that was submitted on behalf of the City Bar in one of those early FOIA cases involving detainees at Abu Ghraib. And yeah, it was just a fantastic learning experience. I worked with international human rights lawyers as well as big law attorneys and really learned a lot from that. And I think going back to your point about networking and how do we actually do it, as someone who is, I think I tend to be shyer in terms of like social interactions, actually being on a committee and doing substantive work is maybe one of the easiest ways to actually connect with people, connect with other attorneys, and really get to know them. The next committee I joined after I had transitioned to the ACLU Women's Rights Project was actually the Domestic Violence Committee. And so sort of the flip of my initial motivation for joining the Civil Rights Committee, once I was at a national organization, I really wanted to stay connected to the New York City attorney legal community around domestic violence issues. I thought it was really important, especially when you're at a national organization, to really understand what's happening on the ground and understand how different legal communities are responding. So that was a really important experience, particularly because of the diversity of members. I think it was one of the few committees up to that point I'd been on where there were a mix of attorneys, professors, judges, where you're working with people coming at it from different vantage points. And it was also because I became chair of that committee relatively early on, it was an early opportunity to develop a personal leadership role in my career, outside of my day job. And I think really coming to understand how you move a group of attorneys who are volunteers, right? Like this is not their job, volunteer attorneys to take on these substantive and meaty projects, which, I think so often City Bar members are really motivated to do. And that's a particularly rewarding part of committee work. And so within that committee, understanding how to set an agenda for the committee, writing reports. I got the opportunity to testify on behalf of the committee in Albany a bunch of times, and putting together CLE programs. I think those are all the bread and butter tasks that different committees do, but they each require real collaboration among attorneys and a real understanding of the legal issues. And I think they're incredibly rewarding for that reason.
Yes, Sandra, I think you bring up some great points. And again, just some of the benefits of the joining the committees, kind of the leadership development that happens just naturally by virtue of being an active participant on a committee, and then in your case, and I think we're going to hear kind of some similar stories here from the other panelists on actually chairing one of these committees or multiple committees. Devika, can you share with folks, what committees you joined and kind of similarly, how your committee participation, how that affected your professional path and other kind of benefits that you derived from committee participation?
Probably comes as no surprise to anyone that much of my focus in terms of committee work at the City Bar was on sort of the ethics related committees. And it's so terrific because the City Bar has kind of this professional cluster of committees, which consists of a number of different committees concerned with issues and challenges affecting the legal profession and the community that we serve. But the ones I focused on were the Professional Discipline Committee, the Professional Responsibility Committee, and the Professional Ethics Committee. So some years ago, sometime after I joined the Professional Responsibility Committee. At that point, I was in my legal career. I was a fairly new ethics lawyer, and studying the ethics rules and the regulations and all the laws governing lawyers was of great interest to me. And I was learning, voraciously learning this area. And that's what the Professional Responsibility Committee does, and does such a great job of, issuing reports, working on projects where they're recommending potential changes to some of the rules, bringing about improvement in the rules generally. All of those initiatives were really important to me, and I was very excited that what I was doing in my work was something that was directly impacted by my work at the City Bar and vice versa, I think. Then I joined the Professional Discipline Committee, which was really focused on examining the procedural rules on discipline. Not so much the ethics rules, which are the rules that bind all of us, and I don't mean this to be an ethics CLE for anyone sitting here and getting into the weeds of these rules, but it's a fascinating area that many of us don't really know so much about, and I really learned on that committee. The procedures for investigating lawyers, for bringing formal proceedings against lawyers, what happens, how does it work, that whole system. Was something I didn't know very much about. And clearly that is what everybody's concerned about if they're concerned about the ethics rules. They don't really want something to go in that direction. And then I moved to the professional, and I should say that I was very fortunate during my time on the Professional Discipline Committee. The outgoing chair offered me, he suggested my name as one of the potential chairs of the committee, and I eventually led that committee. So I was both learning about this area and also learned a lot from the colleagues on the committee itself, which was it was a terrific experience. It's the best way to learn. And then I moved to the Professional Ethics Committee, which is another amazing committee. They're the ones who write these incredible ethics opinions that are widely relied upon by the legal profession. They're on the websites, we all are guided by them, and they run a really important thing, and that's the ethics hotline, and I served on that as well. And then from there, the City Bar has this kind of committee of committees called the Council on the Profession, which brings together all of these committees that I mentioned, but also every other committee that's involved, both from D&I perspective to legal education, junior lawyers, anybody who has anything to do with the legal profession. It's kind of part and parcel of that council, which does incredibly important work. So as you can see, the committee work has been really integral, an integral part of my City Bar engagement. And my my keen interest in ethics and professional responsibility was really sort of part and parcel of my area of practice. And that's something that I must immerse myself in at the city bar. That work being so closely connected also led me to have an opportunity to work with both our committees, whichever one I was serving on, as well as those who were doing related work, because some of the committee jurisdictions are sort of overlapping to some extent, and worked with them on putting together and organizing CLE programs on ethics and professionalism. So kind of widened my network of knowing more people and working with them in yet another way, not just what we were doing with drafting reports and working on different projects and initiatives, but putting together programs, kind of like the one we put together here, and getting to know people, and that also that was very interesting to do, because we were always looking for ethics topics that were current, topical, and clearly the ones that the audience attending would be interested in, especially given that ethics is considered to be somewhat of a dry area. People want to attend it because they kind of have to attend it. So we wanted to move away from that and make these engaging and interesting for people. And that was another opportunity because of my interest in licensing and admissions issues, which are also so clearly tied, with the character and fitness issues to some of the ethics related work. I was involved with the New Lawyer Institute and did some speaking engagements for them on what you need to know to get admitted in the first department and the second department. And at the same time, I was able to liaise a little bit with the City Bar student ambassadors, which was a lot of fun. So really, for me, my committee engagement has been just very significant, given that it's tied to my own field of practice, but also very, very positive, and has given me a perspective that I don't think I would have had if I was really just, in my office, toiling away, doing my research, trying to, help clients with their work. It really gave me a much greater understanding of the role of our profession as we serve our legal community, and of course, professionalism and ethics in a much wider way.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, to what Devika is saying. I think what I've always very much appreciated about the different committees or task forces that I've been involved with the City Bar is I think there's such a general respect that people have for each other on these committees, because quite often there are areas of the law where people are coming together and they might be generally adversaries in court, or they may be coming from very different perspectives, but the committee space is actually a space where very professionally, very respectfully, a lot of those differences are actually really discussed and really thought out. And, it's the result of great negotiation and compromise that then ends up in a final report, if that is the work product that it ends up in, report or analysis, etc. I will also note that board members, so folks who are on the City Bar's executive committee, I think have an even uniquer perspective on the committee structure, because quite often board members or executive committee members are asked to be liaisons over different areas. So I know when I was on the executive committee, I think both times I was on the executive committee, I was asked to look at spaces where I would then join either committee meetings or speak with the chairs of folks who were thought of having more international practices, so international human rights, or I think I had the military. I'm forgetting the actual name of the committee, but Military Affairs Committee and some other different committees that were in that space. So not only do you have your actual committee experience, but as the executive committee member, and I know Judge Matsumoto, I'm pretty sure that in your experience also on the executive committee, you also had the opportunity to look at some of those other committees as the kind of board liaison to those different committees.
Yes, one of the tasks we're asked to engage in is to attend some of the meetings, and occasionally we meet with the chairs and talk about their work and the pillars of the Bar Association that our esteemed president Boston has established for us. And I'm pleased to say that among all the committees that I've met with, they are aware and they are implementing the various pillars of the city bar. So it's an opportunity to even broaden further one's contacts and understanding of the rich range of committee work that's available. And many of the committees, not all of them, but many of them do issue reports. And I think, as Devika pointed out, they're well regarded, these reports. They are well crafted, they're thoughtful, and when a committee speaks, those reports are received and read, and people listen, so to speak.
Kathy, do you want to add something about your committee experience?
Yeah, I mean, I was a co-chair of the overarching diversity, equity, and inclusion committee at City Bar. I had not been all that active after I joined. And then one of the co-chairs of that committee reached out to me and essentially drafted me. And I ended up spending, this was about 3 years, being one of the co-chairs of that committee. And it was a fascinating experience because, among other things, you do become exposed to the richness of the committee work of the City Bar. There are so many City Bar committees that focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. The one that I was co-chair of had the odd acronym, I think it was EDITP. When I joined it, it was Enhanced Diversity. We were the Enhanced Diversity in the Profession Committee. We eventually changed that name to something that was a little bit easier to remember, just the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. But it was, to me, a valuable experience, in part because, as Sandra mentioned, I mean, you can really learn something about leadership if you end up becoming a chair or a co-chair of one of these committees. And for me, that was a valuable experience, and preceded by a couple of years, my becoming the acting chair of a city commission and a co-chair of a not-for-profit corporation. So I thank the City Bar for giving me that training, so to speak. I guess the other committee that I served on was as a member of the Honors Committee, which Judge Matsumoto chaired. But in terms of just the richness of the committee offerings, I don't think that I had a true appreciation of that until I became a vice president of the City Park this year. I mean, Sheila mentioned that she had her 3 vice presidents. Well, I was one of them, and gained an appreciation of how hard the president of the City Bar works. Because one of the things the vice presidents do is they pick up the extra stuff that the bar president is working on. And that included, taking a look at the reports that the different committees wanted to issue under the name of the City Bar. And I mean, the quality of the reports, the variety of the reports was just amazing to me. So that experience as well, while it wasn't being part of a committee, was valuable to me.
I think you're muted.
I got it. Thanks for that, Kathy. And I think that hopefully the kind of professional benefits of the City Bar, both committee structure and the joining leadership in different aspects. I think that becomes very clear just in hearing everyone's experiences. I mean, law school teaches you how to be a lawyer. It doesn't necessarily teach you how to be a leader or an executive, right? So also for folks who are looking to grow in their experiences, whether they're trying to become a law firm partner, or they're trying to become a senior attorney at a not-for-profit, or they're, looking to chair, something else. I think, what I've also appreciated so much is how the leadership opportunity I had at the city bar, I think really kind of opened for myself, kind of self-reflecting that, I enjoyed a leadership opportunity and how to do it, and you kind of learn how to do it in a smaller setting that's not as daunting as doing it in some of the larger professional settings that you had. I'm going to turn a little bit more to kind of a more personal take on things, as folks who know me know that I like to mix the kind of the personal reflections on things with my professional work. I always talk, for me, I always talk about how going into the field of human rights was very also personal to me, just given my own life experiences and the experiences of people who are close to me in my communities. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about, what it has meant to each of you. You're all leaders in your profession, right? In one way or another, and for some of you in multiple ways. Whether you look at solely the fact that you are on the executive committee for the New York City Bar Association, or you look at just, what you do in your day jobs. And I want to talk a little bit about the meaning that has had for you in doing that, how you have felt about that personally. For me, how I feel about it personally is very much intertwined with how I feel about it from the perspective of, increasing representation in the profession for newer and younger attorneys and people who are even thinking about the practice of law or thinking about going in this direction. I just recounted a story recently to someone, telling them about my first time in federal court. So my first time in federal court was when I was an associate at Sullivan and Cromwell, and I was working on a CJA case with one of the partners. And we were in the Eastern District of New York, appearing before a judge who was no longer on the bench. And I walked into the courtroom, and he said, "We can start now, the interpreter's here." And I remember that experience like it happened yesterday. And I remember there was laughter. I remember turning around and being very confused as to what was happening. And then I remember finally it hit me. I understood what had just happened with the person who was, for all intents and purposes, my adversary in court, laughing. And it's a moment I will never forget because it was so striking to me. And I think about that moment quite a bit. And when I think about, we talk about how our lives pull us in different directions, and why do we do certain programs, and why do we join certain associations. And I will tell you, for me, a lot of what pulls me is the idea of representation, creating more familiar faces that look like mine in these spaces, so that people don't make those types of assumptions that judge made when I went into the courtroom, right? It is both to create more familiarity with a face like mine or an identity like mine, but it is also so that the newer attorneys or younger attorneys or folks who are thinking about it also think to themselves, wow, there's someone out there like me that I kind of aspire to be or do the work that she's doing, and it's possible, and there's great folks out there doing it, and I'm not going to be the first one. And I am positive that in some way, shape, or form, everyone else on this panel has had those moments or those experiences, because they are all too common, not only for all of us, but sadly they're still very common for new attorneys and law students and the folks who are coming up. So I'm going to ask for some reflections, I think, from each of you on, why is it important for you to be on the executive committee for the city bar, and or during my introduction, I laid out very impressive bios for all of you. And you all have families, and you all have hobbies, and you all have lives outside of the law, but you choose to do this other work, to be the co-chair of this, to be the task force leader of that. Why do you do it? Personally, why do you do it? So I'm going to start with Kathy on this one.
Okay. I must admit, as a very young associate at Cadwalader, I thought of the city bar as being a very elite bar association. Aside from the fact that, as I mentioned, it was sort of geographically undesirable for me, I wasn't at all sure that somebody who looked like me would be at all welcome at a bar association like this. When I first started at my firm, they still had their firm dinners at a club that didn't admit women as members, right? So as a young lawyer going there with all the colleagues I worked with every day, I had to go through a different door and hang my coat in a different place. Times have changed since then. And times have also changed for, people choosing the type of specialty that I chose. In my time, there were very few Asian American women in the court system. Asian American women did not become litigators. Part of that is sort of the image that we have as being seen and not heard, perhaps. So I was often the only one I would ever see in court who was female and Asian American. And it has been, a wonderful thing over the years to see that change, to see people like Judge Matsumoto become, federal judges, to see more and more young women in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and to see more and more young Asian American women just, becoming litigators at the big firms as well. And, it does matter, the representation that you mentioned. Maybe not for someone who is not Asian American female, but my hope is that the young women who see that, women can go out and become AUSAs, they can become federal judges, they can become litigation partners at the big law firms. I think that matters. And it's a source of pride to me at this point that when people walk into the city bar, my picture is one of those pictures up on the wall there, which is one of the things that city bar leadership wanted to do to make sure that the walls of the city bar reflected the kind of diversity that is now present in our association.
Davica?
Listening to Kathy speak, I'm thinking of the area of practice that I chose, which is legal ethics. And, I'm always asked, largely by non-lawyers, but often by lawyers as well, what is that? There's a lot of curiosity around the practice, but also, why are you doing that? And how are you doing that? And where did this come from? And so it's interesting. The curiosity is interesting, but in terms of the leadership position, I have to say clearly, it means a lot to me personally. Professionally, it's very rewarding, and I think that the fact that we can be at the City Bar Board, playing a part in the important decision making that's happening, reviewing the issues that are before us, matters. And I feel a sense of great belonging to the place. And I think that being on the board with all of you who are panelists today, but board members, makes me very proud. representation is incredibly important. And I, like all of you, encourage younger people to consider the law strongly. I have a little story to tell about representation. Some years ago, there was an international delegation that was visiting New York, and I was involved in an organization. And they were visiting the US and other countries and bar associations in different places because they were looking to revamp that foreign country's ethics rules and their disciplinary system in general. So they were looking for people who are ethics lawyers to speak with. And they brought along a number of their senior advocates, and they had a bunch of staff members with them, cameras and video recorders. And there were two of us who were in this room with them. One was a lawyer who was an international lawyer, but not a foreigner. And the other person was me, and I was basically there because we were going to answer questions on ethics and discipline and so on. And I don't practice in the international sphere. As the questioning started, it was quite formal. We didn't realize it was going to be, and we were given a long list of questions in advance that, you know, we tried to look at in advance. But as the questions started, they were largely, I should say, exclusively directed to the international lawyer who was there really because of his expertise in international issues. And there were questions about conflicts of interest rules, unauthorized practice of law, attorney advertising regulations. And as he was, I mean, as soon as it started out, he was pointing his fingers this way, saying, you know, that's her, not me. They came with the assumption, I think, and that preconceived notion that I was the person on the international side and not on the discipline and the ethics side, and that the other lawyer was clearly going to be talking about the US ethics rules and so on. It was very interesting. I mean, they apologized profusely. They were a little embarrassed, but I think that's just another example of how easy it is for something like this to happen, and also how often it can happen.
Yeah, so many similarities in stories, right? Sandra?
Yeah, I really appreciate all of those reflections. Yeah, when I heard the question, it made me think of a lot of the questions I initially had even going into law, you know, whether it was the right field for me, personality-wise and interest-wise. And I especially remember a conversation I had early on with my parents who, you know, I emigrated with when I was young to the US. And, you know, they really cautioned me against entering law, in part because, yeah, they worried about the barriers for a Korean American woman, especially someone like me who was interested in being a litigator, like Kathy mentioned. And yeah, I mean, actually, they were flat out against it, just to be totally open. And so, you know, I think contrary to what, you know, a lot of folks might think your parents want you to be a lawyer, my parents definitely did not want me to enter the law. And I've been very, you know, blessed in a lot of ways along my path. I mean, my very first supervisor at the Legal Aid Society was a Japanese American attorney who was an incredible mentor. And you know, and I now, you know, realize like I'm in a position where the Asian American attorneys who are coming up, yeah, they look to all of us, right, as people who have different leadership roles in the bar. That, you know, younger attorneys now I see could, you know, I have a fellow in my office who's clerked for one Asian American judge, will be clerking for another one. You know, that type of experience I think is just completely something I would never have imagined when I was coming up. But that said, you know, we still have so much work to do. And I really appreciate the City Bar's very intentional efforts to diversify. I think it's certainly the sort of leadership or group in terms of the board of directors, the most diverse that I have been a part of in any legal realm, and that's been an incredibly rewarding experience.
Thanks, Sandra. I'll share that when I told my parents I wanted to go towards law instead of medicine, they said, you know, we took the whole gay thing, but this is it. This is too much. Judge Matsumoto.
Well, like Carmelyn, I had many strange experiences in court when I started out as an assistant U.S. attorney back in 1983. So everything from interpreter to court reporter. I flew even with an FBI agent to visit a witness down to Miami, and they asked me if I was his prisoner. So I think that, you know, assumptions are made, but I think these types of experiences teach us a certain fortitude and ways to address those situations. And I think, I'm not saying they're great, certainly, but one of my practices now as a judge is that I really do encourage law firms to let their younger, less experienced lawyers have a voice. I tried a case that went on for weeks, and I noticed all the women were sitting back away from counsel table against the wall, occasionally diving into a box to retrieve a document. And during one recess, I finally said, look, I'm assuming, are these lawyers here, these women who are sitting back against the wall? And they said, yes. And I said, well, they need to come to the table. There's a place at them. Move over, move your chairs. I want to see them at the table, and I want to see them participate meaningfully in this trial. They can do more than retrieve documents. And I think that when I look at the city bar and the board, I'm always encouraged that given its diversity, that it sends a signal to the bar membership as a whole. I hope that this is an association whose house is big enough for all of us, the Association of the Bar, and that there's work to be done at many levels. I think one of the missions that I had as chair of the honors committee, and I was very grateful that Kathy agreed to serve, but we looked at past honorees and we thought, you know, it would be really nice to think about how we could include others as association medal honorees. And so we thought about it, and we ended up during my tenure awarding the bar's highest honors to Justice Sotomayor, and her award ceremony was very highly attended. And at that ceremony, they also unveiled a portrait. And I remember many of the people there said it would be so nice to have her portrait in the association great room, you know, to add new portraits, new faces. We have Mr. Maldonado, and I've heard that other portraits may soon hang in that great hall. We also honored Loretta Lynch and Mary Jo White and Zach Carter. And what they've all had in common is a life of service to the public, as well as significant experience in the private sector. And I thought that they brought a real diversity and maybe a new background. And, you know, unfortunately, we had to take a little hiatus during COVID, but the committee, I think, was really a bunch of really great members who were dedicated to thinking about other ways to honor people. And again, I think what that does is send a signal to the membership at large that there is a place for you in this house.
Thank you for that. Thank you to all of you for sharing those personal reflections. I mean, I feel like there's such real ways in which just our presence, right? And again, just so many examples already just given here just now, but just our very presence in a space changes the space. right? Whether it's, there have to be places for women to be able to meet too, if you're meeting in a space that doesn't allow women. And I would say these days, call Sandra also, or Commission on Human Rights, right? If something like that is happening, but like it changes, in some ways the actual physical spaces or the actual policies of institutions or organizations to have members that do that. I remember that even, again, earlier in my career before marriage equality, my inclusion in certain organizations meant that those organizations had to kind of revisit their policies with regards to how they looked at families because of my family, right? And so again, I just think the importance of representation, though that doesn't solve every issue, of course, but it is so incredibly important to have you all as leaders in the different spaces that you're in. It's been, I've done, I think probably increasingly in the last 2 years during the pandemic, I have been asked to be a part of more programs than I had ever been in the past, really reflecting on my experience as an Asian American woman, much more so than I have been asked in the past. And I think that one of the reasons that has been is because of the way that there has been almost this kind of newfound interest in really looking at understanding and exploring kind of the diversity of API communities. There's been much more, I think, discussion of that because also in the last 2 years, we've also seen, unfortunately, and horrifically, just increased reports of anti-Asian racism and violence, right? This is true in New York City. This is true across the entire country. And in many of these cases, the people who are specifically targeted are older API folks and women, people who identify as women. And so, I know that this is not the focus of this program, but I think it bears reflecting, since we do have some leaders here who also kind of feel this issue very personally in your own communities. And as I was just kind of looking at the diversity of our communities here, we have folks who are South Asian, Southeast Asian, East Asian, and a variety of kind of East Asian. So we're all coming from diverse API communities, even within this panel itself. I think it would be interesting for folks to hear from us a little bit on, what responsibilities does the legal community have? So this is not just the City Bar Association, but broader than that, like what can we be doing as a community of lawyers to address what has been what we're seeing reported as a manifestation of an increase of violence. But what we all know, and this is part of what we were just reflecting on, is part of a larger and of course longer history of anti-Asian racism or discrimination or bias. And when I was at the Commission on Human Rights, one of the things that I would talk about in some of these programs and panels that we're focusing on it is how the importance of actually talking about this history, and also recognizing that sadly the reflections that I would be sharing of examples of anti-Asian racism or bias from when I was a child were very similar to what we were still hearing from, kids at school who are going through some of those things now, right? But so I'm going to bring us back to so here we are all leaders in different areas in the law. What should we be like? What would we want to see? What would we want to see other bar associations or legal departments or other folks in law? What can be done? What should be done? Here's a platform. identify some things that it would be great to see more of X. What are some of those things? Sandra, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's a really important question. I'll just start off with some preliminary thoughts and really want to hear from others on this. I think I should first start with recognizing how the hate and violence has been affecting folks on a very personal level. I know many of the recent incidents have just been devastating, even though, as you say, they connect to a longer history of anti-Asian hate and violence. But I do think, for each of us individually, really thinking about how we're processing this and how we're connecting with others around these experiences is very important. One thing that I think we all recognize is that so much of this hate and discrimination has often been invisible until more recent times, and even now continues to be not discussed and not people are not aware of. And so making sure that we're sharing our experiences and connecting with others within whatever community we're talking about, whether it's your family community, your church community, your workplace community, to help lift up these experiences and what that type of discrimination may be, how that might be affecting you, whether it's as an employee, as a member of whatever organization, and how you're dealing with it on the family and community level, I think is really important. Especially for Asian American women, I think a lot of what we've seen, we know is hate and violence that is also committed at the intersections of who we are, as based on race and gender, based on stereotypes about Asian American women being submissive or sexualized in various ways, and just recognizing that unique experience or unique aspect of it, I think is very important. So part of it is connecting on a personal level, connecting, also just reporting our stories. And there's been a lot of efforts around documenting anti-Asian hate and violence, led, I think, by advancing Asian Americans Advancing Justice and other groups. And so that's also one thing that I've just been encouraging folks to do, whether it's in the legal community or not. But if you feel comfortable, think about reporting those experiences because they've been so under the radar and not discussed for so long. And then as a legal community, there are a few things I've been thinking about. There's one major intersection in the direct work I do on behalf of Asian American women who may be experiencing gender and racialized violence. And so thinking about the different policies that we'd want to see put in place and trying to connect the personal experiences with the systemic forces that have encouraged this type of discrimination. But I also think, as the legal community, we should recognize that we have a lot of skills that we can bring to bear, whether it's somebody like me who directly works on certain social justice issues, or other attorneys that, we're equipped to interpret, analyze, think about how laws and policies are impacting our communities, and, trying to bring that analysis to our advocacy. As well as offering legal services to Asian American community groups and other organizations that maybe traditionally haven't had those partnerships with different legal resources around the city and elsewhere. And then the other thing that I always like to mention in these conversations is part of the education that you were talking about, like really understanding some of the actual Asian American legal history, which I know Kathy and others have done so much work around, I think is very important for the legal community. And I also include in that understanding the larger history of discrimination against people of color, including African Americans, particularly because in this time, I think it's really important to build cross-racial solidarity around the different forms of violence and discrimination that are being perpetrated, because I really also get concerned that when different policy proposals come up, for example, around reliance on the criminal legal system to respond, where it's, where the policy is really about sole reliance, that will undermine some of our larger solidarity and our larger goals around criminal justice reform. I'll start with those thoughts and look forward to hearing from others.
Thanks for that, Sandra. And just to echo, I think it's been really wonderful that I think a lot of the community responses coming from at least API communities in New York City has been to draw on ways in which, both, or I should say other communities that have been targeted for similar types of discrimination or violence, the ways in which those movements for justice are intertwined with movements for justice within AAPI communities. That's been, I think, very heartening within New York City. Kathy, I'm going to turn to you, and then just looking at time, we're gonna kind of go for a wrap up. But Kathy,
Okay. Well, as Sandra mentioned, indeed, I am part of a team of lawyers from the Asian American Bar Association of New York, a team of which Judge Matsumoto is also a part. And we have been putting together historical trial reenactments for many years now. This was an effort started by my husband, Judge Denny Chin. And one of these trial reenactments is focused on anti-Asian violence, because it is nothing new. As Sandra mentioned, there is a long history of that. And President Boston was kind enough to invite us to the City Bar to put this reenactment on in March of this year. The title was Kung Flu, A History of Hostility and Violence Against AAPIs. So we presented at City Bar in March. We went through some of the history of the violence against AAPIs, and we did try to mention some of the ideas that Albany has floated out there in its reports on anti-Asian violence. And one of them is indeed education. Just doing programs where people learn about the roots of the violence, what some ideas might be as to how to push back against it. And indeed, one of the suggestions is to report these incidents, to try to push them to be classified as hate crimes, to encourage people to speak out and be counted. And we're very grateful to City Bar and to President Boston, who actually played a role in this reenactment, for inviting us to City Bar in order to share this. It's very important just to get the story out there.
thanks for that, Kathy. Looking at the time, I realize it was very easy to just continue chatting with this group of folks. And again, it's been a particular privilege and honor for me because this is actually a panel of people who I respect greatly and have not really had an opportunity to kind of be in any sort of community or program with. So I'm grateful for the City Bar bringing us together. But I do want to give it back to President Boston to kind of wrap this up and have the final word. And just thank Devika, Kathy, Sandra, and the judge for being a part of tonight's program and for sharing with us your personal and professional experiences tonight.
Bless you. And thank you so much, every single one of you. You knocked it out the park. I was taking some notes and things, I think, important messages I just want to throw out there. I heard that implicit biases and stereotypes still exist. I heard that representation matters. I heard a sense of true belonging matters. I heard that we need to have solidarity across racial groups which have endured historical discrimination and violence across the years in this country. I heard that, the City Bar has been and is growing and will continue to be, is my prayer, a place that welcomes all. I have seen that we have some wonderful leaders. And I have worked with each of you, and I am so very proud of each of you and respect each of you deeply. And I'm just going to add, I happen to know, and I think most of you do too, there is research which has shown diverse groups actually come up with the best work products. They come up with the best solutions to problems because they think in different ways, as opposed to having that, oh, we all think the same think tank, right? The City Bar is a great place. And, I'm not going to say it's perfect yet. We are on our way, I hope. We still have a ways to go, but let's all continue this path to progress. Let's be vigilant about making the city bar and our profession as a whole more diverse, more equitable, and more inclusive. Again, I want to thank our magnificent moderator. Bless you for being here. And my posse, the one and only Devika, Kathy, Sandra, and Kiyo Matsumoto. Bless you all. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and everyone have a great, great night. Take care.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you.